Some Marvel characters were not forgotten because fans stopped caring about them. They were forgotten because Marvel brought them back and still did not know how to use them. That is what makes this list so interesting. Hey everyone, leave a like, subscribe, and drop a comment telling me which Marvel comeback disappointed you the most. Let's get started. If you're into comics and nerd content like this, hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you don't miss the next video. Ben Reilly built a real following as Scarlet Spider, so his return in Amazing Spider-Man number 75 came with genuine hype. Backed by the Beyond Corporation, he stepped in as Spider-Man while Peter Parker was down, which made the comeback feel important instead of nostalgic filler. That is exactly why the turn hit so hard. Marvel brought him back as a major replacement, then quickly pushed him toward another breakdown and another identity crisis. Instead of letting that return rebuild him, the story leaned into the damage Ben had already carried for years until he became Chasm. Marvel then tied him to Dark Web beside Madeline Prior, turning a fan-favorite comeback into another clone tragedy. The problem was not bringing him back. The problem was giving readers a hopeful revival, then steering him almost immediately into a darker identity that felt like wasted potential. Madeline Prior was never just another clone story. Mr. Sinister created her from Jean Grey's DNA, she married Cyclops, and she became Cable's mother before Inferno twisted her into the Goblin Queen. That history made her return in Hellions feel genuinely exciting, especially because Marvel was finally giving one of the X-Men line's most tragic figures a new spotlight instead of treating her like old continuity baggage from another era. But after that comeback, Marvel still kept circling the same wounds. Madeline was pushed into Dark Web beside Ben Reilly, then repositioned as Limbo's ruler and the leader of Dark X-Men. Those moves gave her status, but they also showed the problem. Every revival seems to drag her back to clone pain, demonic imagery, and recycled trauma, instead of fully letting her evolve beyond the role that first shattered her identity for readers. Donald Blake began as Thor's mortal identity after Odin cast his son to Earth to teach him humility, turning Mjolnir into a cane and leaving Blake to live as a doctor with no memory of his divine life. That made him one of the oldest and strangest parts of Thor mythology. So his return in Thor number 9 should have felt like a major emotional payoff, instead of just a dark surprise waiting to happen somewhere in the far background later. Instead, Marvel brought Donald Blake back as a vengeance-driven threat. Thor's own history had already reframed Blake as a constructed life, and when he returned, the story rushed toward rage, horror, and violence against Thor's world. There was real tragedy in a man learning his existence was built as a lesson for someone else, but Marvel used that idea mostly to turn him into a monster, instead of exploring the heartbreak behind it in depth. Kraven the Hunter earned comic book immortality through Kraven's Last Hunt, a story so definitive that his death became part of what made him legendary. For years, that ending gave the character rare weight in Spider-Man history. So when the Kravinoff family resurrected Sergei during Grim Hunt, the comeback carried instant shock value, because Marvel was reopening a chapter many readers thought should have stayed closed for good. Marvel did find new ways to use him, including the Hunted storyline, but that also exposed the problem with bringing Kraven back at all. His resurrection left him trapped in a cursed existence, and later stories kept searching for another final hunt after he already had the perfect one. Instead of strengthening the myth, the return made one of Spider-Man's greatest endings feel less final, less haunting, and a little less powerful over time. Sentry was never truly forgotten the way some Marvel characters were, but he became the kind of figure the company keeps reviving without ever locking into a lasting direction. Bob Reynolds always returns with a huge hook, a fallen godlike hero, the power of a million exploding suns, and the void waiting inside him. That made his relaunches feel important on paper, especially when Marvel gave him another push in 2023 and then again in 2026. The problem is that nearly every comeback circles the same storm. Marvel keeps reopening Bob's story as a war between unstable power and the void, so the return feels dramatic, but rarely definitive. Instead of finally giving Sentry a stable place in the universe, the publisher often resets him into another internal collapse. So he fits this video best not as a forgotten hero, but as a comeback, Marvel still has not truly figured out how to land. Wonderman has one of the strangest histories in Marvel, because Simon Williams began as a villain, became an Avenger, turned into a Hollywood celebrity, and cheated death more than once. Marvel itself has highlighted how often he comes back, which makes him a perfect example of a character the publisher clearly values. His ionic energy powers, Avengers legacy, and big personality make every return sound bigger than it feels on the page. What hurts those revivals is that Simon rarely gets a stable place after the return. One story leans into celebrity, another into ionic energy, and another into old Avengers drama, but the line never seems fully committed to one direction. That leaves Wonderman in a strange spot where Marvel keeps reminding readers he matters, yet still struggles to turn those comebacks into a long-term role that sticks the way his potential says it should. Darkhawk was one of Marvel's most recognizable younger heroes of the 1990s, so bringing him back for Heart of the Hawk in 2021 sounded like the start of a real revival. Marvel framed that anniversary special as a celebration of his legacy and a setup for a bright future. On paper, that is what fans wanted. A push that respected Chris Powell, remembered why the character mattered, and gave Darkhawk a real chance to rise again in a modern era. Instead, the comeback quickly shifted into a mantle handoff. Connor Young became the new Darkhawk in the following series, which was a fresh idea, but it also meant the classic version never fully reclaimed the spotlight. That is why Darkhawk works for this theme. Marvel revived the name and concept, but not really the fan favorite many expected. The return created momentum, yet it never became the Chris Powell resurgence that it first promised. Sleepwalker came back with a built-in hook most Marvel revivals would love to have. He was never just a random 90s oddity, but a guardian of the mindscape, a dream realm tied to the minds of sentient beings. That made Infinity Wars. Sleepwalker feel like a smart way to reintroduce him, because Marvel dropped him into a reality warping event where his powers and mythology actually mattered instead of feeling like background trivia. But that return also showed the problem. Marvel revived Sleepwalker in a mini that fit his concept, then mostly let him drift back into scattered appearances like Hellcat rather than building real momentum. So the comeback was not a disaster in the usual sense. It was a quiet missed chance where a character with a bizarre and memorable premise finally got a modern spotlight, only for that spotlight to fade almost immediately again. Deathlock should have been one of Marvel's easiest comeback wins, because the concept is still strong. A fallen soldier rebuilt as a cybernetic weapon in a ruined future. In 2024, Marvel gave him a real push again with Deathlock 50th Anniversary Special, celebrating the legacy that started in Astonishing Tales. On paper, that sounded like the perfect setup to bring a cult character back into the conversation with real force again. Instead, the return mostly reinforced an old pattern. Marvel remembers Deathlock when it wants an anniversary, a prestige one-shot, or a reminder of how weird and influential the character can be, but rarely commits to a bigger ongoing role after that. So even when the comeback sounds important, it often feels temporary. Deathlock never completely disappears, yet Marvel still struggles to make his returns feel like the start of something bigger. Maddie Franklin had a built-in emotional angle that should have made her return matter. As the third Spider-Woman, she had history in Marvel's Spider-Man corner, and Clone Conspiracy finally brought her back from the dead through the Silk tie-ins. That gave Marvel a real chance to restore a younger legacy character with unfinished potential, especially because her death had already been tied to Craraven's resurrection story years earlier. But like a lot of event-driven revivals, the comeback felt more useful to the crossover than to Maddie herself. Her return created tension for Silk and J. Jonah Jameson, yet it never became the start of a major new chapter for her own identity. That is why she fits this theme so well. Marvel brought Maddie Franklin back with real emotional weight, then let the moment pass without rebuilding her into a lasting presence again for readers. Sometimes a comeback only shows how much potential was wasted in the first place, and these Marvel characters are proof of that. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed the video, leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments which comeback you think deserved better.